Well, good morning. If you don't know me, my name's Scotty. I am one of the pastors here, and I get the pleasure of helping lead us into all the crazy things that God is asking us to do. In pre-service prayer this morning, someone, as we were listening to what God might want to say, one of the comments was, "Change is inevitable, so get used to it." We can choose how we respond. So I guess that makes me the crazy person that leads us in change, right? Which is fun. There is a very familiar, very warm, very enjoyable feeling that I'm sure you've all felt before. I get this feeling a lot when I go to a very special place on a very special day of the week. So on the fourth Thursday, or it's technically the last Thursday of the month, there's a group of pastors from around Portland. We all descend on Mount Angel Abbey to have a retreat day together. So it's pastors from all over the city, and we gather, we meet, we share, we eat, and just have a lot of time alone during the day with Jesus. But we arrive normally at 9 a.m., there's a little bit of introductions, and then this weird thing happens where we break into groups and we tend to go around the circle and just check in on where you're at in your life right now. Ever been in one of those moments where it's like a little bit of check-in, and the goal is share what you're experiencing and then pray for each other. And what it usually looks like is one pastor will start sharing all the horrible things going on in their life and congregation. And you go, oh my goodness, it's not just me. Oh, I'm not alone. They share the things going on in their family, things that they're struggling with. And that moment of like, oh my goodness. Then comes the moment where it gets to you and you're like, I feel like I can share what's going on in my life because you've been vulnerable. And you start to share the things you're wrestling with, struggling with, celebrating, and people look at you and they're like, it's so hard, we get it. And it's like, these people get me. They know what I'm feeling. They know what I'm going through. I actually remember the first time I ever went. It was just starting. A group of pastors, we decided we would go meet down at Mount Angel Abbey. I remember the very first time I was in a season of ministry that was quite difficult. It was probably 5-6 years ago. And I remember arriving and we're sitting around this conference table. There were probably like a dozen or 14 pastors in this circle. And they were like, we're going to go around the circle and we're going to share how we're doing. And I'm like, as he starts describing it, I'm like, there's no way I'm being honest about what's going on in my life right now. They know the people involved and what's hard for me right now. I can't do that. First guy starts sharing and just pours his guts out. And I was like, I know the people he's talking about, and I know the church he leads at. And man, that guy's life's a mess, but wow, that's great. And we go around the circle and everyone just unloads the difficulties of a life of ministry. And we're not there because we hate it. We're there because we love it and we want an environment where we can be free and honest. But what I experienced around that table was shared experience and a key word, empathy. Right? People that understood what I was going through and were willing to walk with me in the pain and the trials of life and of ministry. And you may not realize this, but as a pastoring can be really lonely. We are lucky that I'm lucky that I live in a city that has a gospel movement that brings pastors together. Do you know there's a movement in our city called Pastor PDX, and their motto is, no pastor walks alone. And as pastors in the city, we're committed to finding the people that are feeling alone and walking alongside them. As we're looking in this series at what it looks like to be mature believers, we're exploring what the world calls emotional intelligence. And we're asking, how do we become more emotionally intelligent Christians so that we can become better people as we walk in the world? Today, I want to look at the key skill of emotional intelligence. And it's the word I just used, empathy. Empathy is a word that we've become really accustomed to hearing. Particularly if you're in the business world, if you're in the self-help world, if you're in the counseling world, if you engage in pop psychology, you know the word empathy. In pop psychology, you may know it better when it's, I'm an empath. It's like a superpower word. Empathy is a primary marker of your emotional intelligence, and it's also a primary marker of relational depth. So empathy can dictate and show to people your level of emotional intelligence. It also dictates your ability with empathy, dictates your ability to go deep in relationships. Empathy is simply the ability to understand and share the feelings of somebody else. When I think about empathy, I think about 1 John 4, because empathy is tied to love. This is what 1 John 4 says. Anyone who does not love does not know God, for God is love. God is love, and all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. Love. God is love, and we're supposed to be people of love. And empathy is core to our experience of love. Let me put it this way. The Christian journey, right? It's a growth in love. Between now and the end of your life, you're supposed to become a more loving person. You can have empathy without love. That's common. Someone you've never met before shares a story, and you feel empathy for them. You feel their feelings. You can have empathy without love, but it is impossible to have love without empathy. It is impossible to love the people around us effectively without empathy. And maybe that's too strong a word, because there are some exceptions, usually tied to physical and neurological disabilities that hinder our ability to experience or express love, but we can still experience the feelings of people around about us. So there are some exceptions. But at the end of the day, if you want to be a person of love, you have to grow in the skill of empathy. If we as a church want to be a more loving community that reflects Jesus to the world, we have to become more empathetic people. Did you realize empathy was core to your spiritual journey? Before we jump into passages, I want to give you a couple of words that run through some of the passages that we're going to look at. There are two key words, one in the Old Testament, one in the New Testament, that come up frequently to describe God, to describe people's movements toward one another, to describe how we're supposed to care for the people around us. The first one is the word racham, which is the Hebrew word, and then the Greek word is splanchnidzomai, which I love that word. It's one of my favorite ones to try and say. Everybody say splanchnidzomai. Oh, you're basically Greek scholars. Look at that. So, reminder, when you're in the Old Testament, we are reading English, but it's translated from Hebrew. When you're in the New Testament, we're reading English, but it's translated from Greek. There is a translation of the Bible called the Septuagint, which is Greek from start to finish. So they've translated the Old Testament Hebrew into Greek, and then the whole Bible is in Greek. And that ends up being really telling, because what happens is whenever the word racham is used in the Old Testament, in the Septuagint, it's replaced with the word splanchnidzomai, which is the one that we are using in the New Testament. Both of the words mean to be moved in your gut. The word splanchnidzomai or splanchnon, which is the noun form of it, is one of the verses when someone's stomach is cut open and the things fall out. That's what we're talking about, your splanchnon, your innards, your guts. Both of these words, interestingly, are tied to the concept of love. So racham means compassion, it means empathy, but it also means love. And whenever you see the word rachamim, it is translated as love. So love and empathy, even in the root words in Hebrew and Greek, are tied together. Love and compassion, love and empathy go together. I want to give you a really crude distinction before we go into what we're about to talk about. So empathy is the ability to feel someone else's feelings, to share feelings with someone else. So you feel the feels. The Bible will often translate splanchnidzomai as compassion. And what compassion is, biblically, is empathy plus action. So compassion is, I feel what you feel, and now I'm moved to do something to rectify your suffering. So you can't have compassion without first having empathy. So we've got empathy, to feel someone else's feelings, compassion, to feel someone else's feelings, and then act to alleviate them. And then there's the word love. And love, biblically, is empathy plus commitment. So you can empathize with someone but not love them because you haven't made a commitment to them yet. But by the time you love someone and make a commitment to them, empathy is at the core of successful relationships. So empathy really is commitment. Love is empathy plus commitment and attachment. I want to look biblically at 4 reasons we should be serious about cultivating empathy as the people of God. And I want us to leave today with an inner commitment to try and be more empathetic people as we engage both the people in the church and then the people outside. So we're going to look at 4 reasons, and then we're going to look at some practical tips for cultivating empathy. So the first one you can see up behind me. Why should we care about cultivating empathy? Because empathy reflects the character of God. It is God's heart and character to be empathetic. There's a story in Exodus 33 where Moses looks at God and says, I want to see your glory. Show me your glory. And God tells him, I'm going to do that. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hide you in the cleft of the rock. I'm going to pass in front of you. You'll catch a little glimpse of it. But if you see it all, you'll die. So I'm just going to give you a little glimpse. And then we go into 34, and this moment happens. And as it happens, God makes a self-declaration to Moses of who he is. So this is what it says. Then the Lord proclaimed his name, the Lord, as he passed in front of Moses. Here's what he said. I am the Lord, the compassionate, the Racham, the Splanchnitzomai God, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love. See the relationship between compassion and love, or empathy and love. I maintain love to thousands and forgive wickedness, rebelliousness, and sin. Yet I don't leave the guilty unpunished. I punish the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation. God, in this encounter with Moses says, show me your glory. And God says, I'll let you see my glory. I'm a God of compassion, a God of empathy, a God of love, a God who feels, a God who's willing to be in the trenches with you in your pain and your suffering. But not a God that means that you suffering means you get what you want, because there's still consequence when you go against my will. In God describing himself, we see the relationship between compassion, empathy, and love. That is the character of God. So, simple number 1, why should we as the people of God care about cultivating empathy as a skill in the world today? Because that's the character of God. And as his people, we're called to reflect that character to the world. Every time you interact with someone without empathy, you are marring the image of God in you and causing that person to have an incorrect image of God as they relate to you as his representative. We're supposed to reflect the character of God, and God is a God of empathy. Secondly, empathy is on full display at the incarnation, right? Empathy is revealed fully in the incarnation of Jesus. So let's remember, what is the incarnation? It's when God decided to come in the flesh and dwell as a human. Because he wants to show us what God is really like, and he wants to show us what it looks like to walk in his ways. In Jesus, the fullness of God dwelt. And Colossians tells us Jesus is the image of the invisible God. So when we look at Jesus, we're seeing the character and the heart of God. So many times when we read of Jesus, we read these words. Moved with splanchnitzomai, moved with compassion, Jesus did something. Moved with compassion, he saw the people that were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And so moved with compassion, he taught them who he was and what it looked like to follow him. Moved with compassion, Jesus healed the sick. He sees a group of people that are listening to his teaching and they've been there for days with no food. Moved with compassion, we get the loaves and fishes story because he encourages the disciples to feed the people. Jesus felt the pain of the people and allowed that to move him into action in a way that reflected both the heart and the action of the God that we serve. The book of Hebrews, though, reveals some deeper purposes in the incarnation. I love Hebrews and what it reveals to us about who Jesus is. At one point in Hebrews 4, it's describing Jesus as the ultimate high priest. And look at the language that it uses to describe the purpose of the incarnation. Since we have a great high priest who's ascended into heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith that we profess. For we do not have a high priest who's unable to empathize with our weakness, but we have one who through the incarnation was tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. So let us approach God's throne with grace and confidence so that we may receive mercy and find the grace we need to help us in our time of need. Part of the purpose of the incarnation was empathy. Jesus came to suffer with us, to identify with the human situation, so that we could then, he didn't need to learn empathy. He was empathy. Jesus was revealing empathy. He came to reveal empathy to us because it's a lot easier to relate to an empathetic person that suffered the way we have than someone that's high and mighty and holy and that we feel completely other from. It is hard to come before a holy God when you realize how sinful you are, but it's easy to come to Jesus knowing he gets it, that he understands the power of temptation, that he knows the difficulty of the human situation, that he's experienced pain and rejection and loneliness and abandonment. Oh, how desperately our world needs people who can incarnate to them the empathetic heart of the God that we worship. A world that feels rejected, that feels judged, that feels worthless. We're living in an isolation, loneliness epidemic in the world right now. How amazing if every Christian could be a person of empathy that would listen to their friends say, I feel alone, and say, oh, I know what that feels like. And I want to come alongside you in that. And I want to incarnate to you love. And then I want to reveal you to the one that makes sure that you're never alone. And I want to bring you into a community of people that will love you. And they'll walk with you in your good and your bad. Come and find a family here in the people of God. Oh, what would happen if the world around us saw Christians like that? As we're saying all through this series, and as I'm talking about right there more explicitly, thirdly, empathy deepens relationships. Pick up any self-help book, any marriage book, any relationship book. Pick up books today about business leadership. They're all going to tell you that successful leadership and successful relationship has empathy at the core. And it's seen so clearly all through the New Testament, right? Passages you're really familiar with. Galatians 6:2. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. What's the law of Christ? Love God, love people. This is how people will know you're my disciples, by your love for one another. How do we fulfill the love law of Jesus? We come alongside and carry the pain and suffering of the people around us. Empathy. No one wants someone going, oh, I'm holy and mighty and got it all together. Yes, I'll come along and help you, miserable poor sinner. Right? That's not what it means to bear burdens. That's what it means to stand in judgment on someone else. Instead, we come alongside and we suffer with them and we connect and we carry it alongside them. 1 Peter 3, all of you. This is Peter's encouragement to the church. This is Peter talking to you right now. All of you, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate, be humble. Almost every exhortation to the church in the New Testament that is an exhortation to love has words like humble or compassionate or sympathetic or encouraging us to bear one another. It's empathy that makes us feel seen when we're sitting with someone else. It's empathy that makes us feel loved when we share what's going on with someone else. It's empathy that reminds us that we're all sinners together. And I listen to the pain of your struggle and I'm reminded of the pain of my own struggle. It's empathy that removes judgment when you disagree with the sin lifestyle of someone else. It's empathy that says, I don't understand, I don't love what you do, I don't agree with what you do, but I know what it is to be tempted. I know what it is to suffer. I know what it is to struggle. And I'm in the same boat. It's empathy that removes judgment. Empathy doesn't mean anything goes, but it does mean that I have chosen to sit with you in the discomfort of your situation. I've chosen to understand what you're going through. I've chosen to show love. In a similar vein, the fourth thing I would say is that empathy leads to reconciliation. Just like most of the New Testament instructions to love have empathy or compassion or splainchnizomai connected to them, almost all of the exhortations to the church about compassion involve forgiveness. I'll give you just a couple of them, but you can go test this out. Read through the epistles and look. Just go on Bible Gateway, stick in the word compassion, and then look at all of the things that come up that are to do with forgiveness. This is Ephesians. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and blameless, get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander. See this divisive language, hateful language, along with every form of malice. Get rid of all of that. How? Be kind and empathetic, compassionate to one another. Forgive one another, just as God in Christ Jesus also forgave you. Colossians 3, dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. Bear with each other. Forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone else, forgive as the Lord God forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Compassion and empathy are the pathway to forgiveness. When someone has hurt you and grieved you, one of the first steps towards healing is to try and put yourself in their shoes and understand the brokenness that they carry that led them to do what they do. I remember reading a sentence in a book by Brené Brown that when I read it, I vehemently opposed her statement. She said, when you're in a situation where you've been hurt, remind yourself this. People are doing the best they can with the tools that they have. And I was like, no, they're not. People are screwing up and they just want to hurt people. Until I started realizing that the times that I've hurt people, I was doing the best that I could with the very broken tools that I had. People are doing the best they can with the tools that they have. Empathy means I look at someone that's hurt me and I try and understand the brokenness of the tools at their disposal, the brokenness of the journey that they're in, the weight of the sin that they've wrestled with. Doesn't excuse what they did, but by trying to understand them, I can move on the pathway toward healing. So four ways biblically we see that empathy is central to the Christian journey, but what are some of the enemies of empathy in our life? What are some of the things that kill empathy or hinder it as we try and walk in it? Some of them have already been kind of mentioned in the background. First one, judgment. Matthew 7, right? Take the speck out of your own eye before you start judging, or take the log out of your own eye before you start judging the speck in someone else's. The ground is level at the foot of the cross. You know that hymn? When we stand in judgment on someone else, we are saying, I am morally superior to you. Therefore, I get to decide what is good and bad, and I get to distance myself from you because my holiness should not be around your unholiness. The encouragement of Jesus is there's a giant, in Scotland we'd say a caber toss. You've seen it in the Highland Games, right? There's a log sticking out of your eye, yet you're fixated on the speck in someone else's. Judgment stops us being empathetic to the people round about us. Empathy pushes past judgment. Not listening. How many of you been in the situation where someone's talking to you and you sort of lose track of what they're saying because you're formulating your response? And you're just waiting for that breath they take so you can jump in with your criticism of what they're saying or your defense of what they're attacking you with. Not listening puts us on the moral high ground and says our answer is better than their answer, and it hinders empathy. There's a great video. I'm sure you've all seen it before. It's in here. Victor, you want to play it? Just to remind you of empathy and listening.
There's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me. And I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head. And it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on, if you would just...
Don't.
Try to see things my way. So I have
We've all been there, right? We've all been on both sides of that. I said earlier, empathy is feeling the feelings of someone else. Compassion is empathy plus action. But what that was action minus empathy. And it's soul destroying when we're the recipients of it. And then all the problem fixers in the room, right? He's not listening, he's formulating the solution. He wants to fix the problem for her when all she wanted was someone to say, that's gotta be hard. I'm going to say in the room, right, a little bit of relationship advice in any relationship. When you sit down with someone, if you don't want advice, please preface your statement with, I don't want any advice, could you just hear me? And then the other person says, I hear that you don't want any advice, you just want me to listen, my ears are open. And if you want advice, please say, I don't need a listening ear, I need someone that can help me fix the issue I'm in. That's empathy. What else hinders empathy? Bias and prejudice. The issues that we bring in. Luke 10, I'm not going to read it all, but the story of the Good Samaritan. The core story of the danger of bias and prejudice in the situations that we're in. Bias and prejudice, again, moral superiority. My place is right, my people are right, my way of doing things is right, your way is wrong. Bias and prejudice is often the result of a lack of cross-cultural experience. Sometimes the way we overcome our biases is by willing to expose ourselves to something a little bit different. Man, I do not see the world the same way you do at all. I would love to just take you to coffee and listen and learn about why you view things the way you do. And I'm going to practice keeping my mouth shut and not jumping in defensively or combatively with the things that you say. Dysregulation, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. And what's an enemy of empathy? When I am not able to control my own emotional response, so that when someone else brings something to me, I don't like it, so I react against them. It triggers trauma in my past, so I can no longer listen. Our dysregulation stops us being able to empathize with someone because we're in that limbic response, that primal fight or flight place. We need to get back to a place of regulation where we can listen well, and we have to practice it day in, day out, so that when we sit down with someone, we have more to offer. And then the whole purpose of this whole series, right? Emotional unawareness. If you're not aware of your own emotional being, if you can't identify your own emotions, then it becomes really difficult to offer empathy to someone else. Some of us are very good at identifying the emotions in someone else. There are many people, I'm not good with my own emotions, but I can tell that you're really upset. You can identify their emotions, but you can't be empathetic because empathy says, I feel what you feel. So I might be able to tell you that you're angry, but I don't acknowledge my own anger, so I can't go, I feel angry with you. I feel sad with you. I feel grieved for you. So the journey into emotional awareness helps us in the journey of empathy. So to reiterate some of those, how do we cultivate empathy in the Christian journey and in our daily lives? First of all, active listening. Wow. You know, this would solve so many of the world's problems. I'm like, I wonder what would happen if God would answer one prayer and I just prayed, God, help us all to listen well. That might actually solve most of the problems that we have. solve wars or fighting, solve political debates, if we could just listen. What's active listening? It's listening to understand, not just to respond. It's listening in an environment where there's not interruptions, so the TV's off, the phone's out the way, the kids are not there, so you can actually focus on one another. Active listening is showing with your body that you're attentive to the person in front of you. You're making eye contact. You're moving toward them. And often active listening is reflecting back to the person what you heard. Oh, I heard you say it was a really bad day at work today. Try this, please, all day today. If you hear someone use an emotion statement, like, even just like, I'm feeling really tired today. I hear you saying you're really tired today. Watch what happens. They go, I am. Oh, work was so frustrating this week. I hear you say that you're really frustrated this week. Yeah, let me tell you about it. Active listening goes so far in cultivating empathy because it teaches us to hear the other person. Practicing putting yourself in other people's shoes, an imagination exercise. I've said this many times here, right? God has given us the gift of holy imagination. We can use our imagination to pretend things into existence inside our being. So when someone comes to you, let's think of this week. There are some people that saw the election result and are elated, right? The economy is going to be better. We're finally putting down the broken political system. There's other people that saw the result this week and they're devastated. I thought for the first time we were going to have a woman in office and we'd actually see equality in our country. I thought we'd finally see a person of color again back in the office. And they're devastated. So what if you sat down and instead of going, oh, that person's so stupid for voting for the other side, you go, wonder what had them so fearful this year about the economy. Wonder what it feels like for that person looking at their retirement that's hard-earned and wondering if the Democratic administration might cause some further challenges to their retirement. That would be scary. I could see that. Or as a white man going, let me think about my black and brown female friends who were super excited that someone that represented them might take the highest office of the land. How disappointed must they be today that didn't happen? And that would be hard. I can see why they'd carry that weight. If we took the time to do that, how do you think the conversation would go when you gathered with your small group? Kamala, you're fired. I don't think that's what it's going to say. Oh, Trump's just a racist and anyone that votes for him's a racist. I don't think that's what you're going to say. Man, this is a tough season. And there are so many hopes in politics here, and there are so many disappointments and hurts. And I know what it's like to not have your candidate voted in. I know what it's like to be fearful about what the next 4 years can look like. I don't know what it's like to not feel represented. But I have been in situations where I've been the outsider, and so I guess I understand a little bit. Would you mind explaining to me what it feels like for you right now to be in this situation? Man, so many issues would be solved if we walked in holy curiosity and engaged in active listening, empathizing with the pain of the people around us. And I'll tell you, in my experience as a pastor and doing pastoral counseling, mentoring people, spiritual directors, and there's other people in the room that are counselors. I'm sure you've had your counseling moments. I feel like, as a counselor, when someone brings their problem to me, my solution is the right one. And that if they just do what I said right now, it would all be solved. But time and time again, what I have seen is by just listening and not saying anything, God has systematically brought them to the place of healing in a way that looked very different sometimes to what I thought, and sometimes very similar to what I thought. But I would trust the Spirit, and I would trust God's formation plan over my own, and be willing to just listen instead of being the one to tell everyone how things should go. Last way to Cultivate empathy, practice emotional awareness. This whole series is talking about this. Pay attention to your emotions this week. Just today. How are you feeling when someone's talking to you? If someone walks over to you and drones on and on and on, ask yourself, what am I feeling inside? Why am I getting angry at what this person is saying? Why am I pulling away from the person? As you're watching the news, as you're seeing things in social media, just ask, why am I feeling what I'm feeling today? And if you can, what would you label it? What is the feeling I'm feeling? Does it have a label? Can I name what I'm feeling right now? And then lastly, expand your circle. Engage with more diverse people. Read books by people that don't look or sound like you, didn't grow up the way you did. Read books by people that are theologically different to you, politically different to you, sexually different to you. Watch documentaries. Stories are great for getting in someone else's head. Read a book, watch a movie, and as you watch it, pay attention to your emotions and their emotions. And ask yourself, what triggers, why am I excited right now? Oh, it's hope. Why am I frustrated right now? It's injustice. Expand your circle, get understanding. This whole series, I'm arguing that in order to be spiritually mature, in order to walk in the way of Jesus, we have to become more emotionally intelligent human beings. So as we're wrapping up today, may God cultivate in us, individually and as a church, an empathetic spirit, and then move us to loving action. So what I want you to do is, here's the question. What's one thing you could try this week to grow in empathy? So group up with some people round about you, answer this question, and then just take a moment, someone from the group, just take a moment and pray that we as a church and you as people would become more empathetic in your walk with Jesus, not just so we become more empathetic people, but so that the character of Jesus is seen through us in the world. So God, cultivate in us an empathetic spirit and move us to loving action.